You ever have a day that starts so calm, so ordinary, you'd bet good money nothing could shake it? That was me, coffee in hand, legs stretched out on the porch, the sun creeping over the rooftops. Just another quiet morning in the cul-de-sac. No drama, no noise. No reason to think the next few minutes would turn my world upside down. Then I saw him, a teenage boy, 16 maybe, walking right up my driveway like it was his own. No hello, no small talk. Just stopped in front of my Harley, pointed a finger, and said, "I'll take that one." I thought I'd misheard him. Maybe he was joking. I even laughed, expecting him to grin back, but his face stayed stone cold. "I'm serious," he said. "Mom said you'd give it to me. She talked to the HOA. I set my mug down slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. "Excuse me?" He nodded toward the end of the street, and that's when I saw her. Karen, the queen of the HOA, arms crossed, sunglasses on, standing like a judge at an auction. She gave me this little wave like we were best friends. I walked toward her, each step heavier than the last. "What is this?" I asked. She didn't even blink. "That motorcycle is an eyesore, and your engine's loud enough to rattle windows. The board agreed. You should donate it to someone who'd appreciate it." "By someone," I said. "You mean your son?" Her smile didn't falter. "Exactly. He's turning 17 next month. It'd be perfect." I laughed out, loud. "You've lost your mind." That's when her expression shifted. The fake friendliness disappeared. "Fine," she said, her voice sharpening. "If you won't be neighborly, I'll escalate this." I didn't know what she meant by escalate, but I was about to find out, and it would involve police. Lights, HOA threats, and a trip to the state attorney's office. I figured maybe she was just bluffing. People like her usually were. But the following Saturday, I learned otherwise. The morning was perfect. Sun on my back, wind in my face, my Harley humming like it had since the day I'd customized it. 12 years I'd owned that bike. Every curve of chrome, every ounce of its rumble was mine. I parked it under the oak tree by my garage, just like always, still wearing my helmet when I heard them. Sirens. 2 police cruisers swung into my driveway like I'd just robbed a bank. The doors popped open. 2 officers stepped out, their hands hovering near their belts. "Sir, step away from the motorcycle," I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Step away from the vehicle. Now." I did as they asked, confused but calm. "Is there a problem, officer?" One of them flipped open a notepad. "We got a report of stolen property on site. A local resident claims you unlawfully took possession of a motorcycle belonging to her minor son." For a second, I thought, maybe I was dreaming. "Wait, what?" Karen appeared then, striding across the street like she'd been waiting for her cue. Her son followed, arms crossed like a wronged prince. "There it is!" she shouted, pointing at my Harley like she'd just found a smoking gun. "That's the one. He promised to give it to my son. Then he backed out. That's theft, right?" I almost laughed. The officer didn't. "Do you have proof of ownership?" "Yeah," I said, moving toward the house. "I've got it inside." "Sir, please stay where you are." The second officer stepped between me and the door. "We'll retrieve it. Just tell us where the papers are." As they went in with my permission, Karen leaned close, her voice a low, smug whisper. "You could have just done the right thing. Now the whole neighborhood's going to know what kind of man you really are." I stared at her, every muscle in my jaw tightening, but I stayed silent. The officers came back minutes later, holding my title and registration. "It's his," one said, clearly annoyed. "Clean title. Been in his name for years." Karen's smirk faded. Her son muttered, "This isn't fair. He said I could have it." "I said no such thing," I snapped. Karen tried to pivot. "Well, maybe he didn't steal it, but he lied to us. That's fraud. Even the cops looked done by that point. They left without charges, without warnings, Just two very frustrated officers who probably regretted ever answering that call. Karen stormed back to her house, her son stomping behind her, and I knew right then, this wasn't over. 3 days. That's how long it took for her next move to land on my doorstep. It wasn't a knock this time. No, she went for something more official-looking. A folded paper taped right to my door, flapping in the breeze, the HOA letterhead. Stared back at me like a threat wrapped in legal jargon. Notice of violation. Community disruption. Failure to comply with neighborhood courtesy standards. Karen's handiwork all over it. According to the letter, I'd created unnecessary hostility toward another resident, failed to honor a verbal agreement to transfer personal property to her son, and continued to maintain a nuisance. Vehicle that detracted from community aesthetic harmony, a nuisance vehicle. That was her name for my Harley. I wanted to laugh, but my hands tightened around the paper instead. This wasn't just nosy neighbor nonsense anymore. This was strategy. She was weaponizing the HOA, turning its rules into her personal crowbar. To pry my bike out of my hands, for most people that might have worked, but I've dealt with worse than HOA paper pushers. I didn't call her. I didn't respond to the board. Instead, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't used in years. Mark. We'd served together in a veterans group. Quiet. Guy, sharp mind, and just happened to work at the state attorney's office. When he picked up, his voice was steady as always. Haven't heard from you in a while. What's going on? I told him everything. The kid in my driveway. Karen's auction-style attitude. The police stunt. Now this HOA letter. By the time I finished, I could almost hear the shift in his tone. She's trying to force a private property transfer through intimidation, he said. That's not just harassment. Depending on how far she pushes, it could be considered civil coercion. Civil coercion. The phrase landed like a loaded round in my mind. Mark told me to gather everything. Documents, photos, proof of ownership, even video if I had it. Bring it here. Let's make sure if she pushes again, she regrets it. That night, my kitchen table looked like a war room. Title and registration? Check. Photos of the Harley from every angle dated across the years? Check. Copy of the HOA letter? Front and center. Then came the ace in the hole, my doorbell cam footage. There was the boy strutting into my driveway, pointing at my bike, saying, clear as day. Mom said you'd give it to me. That was my gold, my proof. By the next afternoon, I was walking into the state attorney's office with a folder so thick it could have doubled as a brick. The receptionist raised her eyebrows when I set it down. Mark's expecting this, I said, sliding it forward. A few days later, the call came. She filed a complaint here, too, Mark said. Claims you made false promises to her son. We've reviewed both sides. There's a chance this goes to mediation, but listen to me. You're not the one under the microscope anymore. The words settled deep in my chest. She wasn't winning. She was losing ground. That Thursday night, I walked into the HOA meeting early, not hiding, not hanging in the back, early enough to take the seat directly across from Karen. She was already there, surrounded by a couple of board members like she was holding court. Her son sat off to the side, arms crossed, chin high. She spotted me and smirked. Oh, you decided to show. Wouldn't miss it, I said, calm as stone. The meeting opened. The HOA president, Bill, a mild man who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, asked for new business. Karen's hand shot up like a student desperate to be called on. I'd like to formally request action against Mr. Owens, she began, her voice dripping with performance. For failure to fulfill a verbal commitment, intentional community disturbance, and inappropriate conduct toward myself and my minor son. Theatrics. Every word delivered like she was on a witness. Stand. Bill nodded slowly. You're referring to the motorcycle situation? Yes, she said, casting a glance my way. He misled my son, promised him the bike, then reneged. And when I tried to mediate, he became aggressive. I stayed silent, letting her spin her web. She went on for 5 minutes straight, painting herself and her son as innocent victims, hinting at mental state concerns about me. That one earned her a few awkward glances from the board. When she finally stopped, Bill turned to me. "Mr. Owens, would you like to respond?" I stood, slow and deliberate, and laid my folder on the table. I flipped the folder open and let the silence hang for a beat. Every eye in the room was on me, and I wanted them to feel the weight of what was coming. "First of all," I said evenly, "I never promised that child anything." I pulled out a stack of printed stills from my doorbell cam footage and began sliding them down the table toward Bill. In each frame, the boy was visible, walking straight onto my property, pointing at my Harley, and saying the exact words that had started, "All of this. Mom said you'd give it to me." The board members leaned in, their brows knitting as they studied the images. "That's not all," I continued, pulling another set of papers from the folder. "These are voice transcripts from our first conversation. Timestamps. Every word. Recorded and stored. No mention from me of any promise because there never was one." Bill adjusted his glasses and glanced at one of the other board members, who was already whispering something in his ear. I set down the next document. The police report from the day Karen called them. No charges. No wrongdoing. Confirmed. Ownership. The pile in front of Bill grew higher, each piece of paper another nail in the coffin of Karen's story. Finally, I slid across a letter stamped with the seal of the state attorney's office. "This is confirmation that her complaint to them was unfounded. They've reviewed both sides, and they aren't pursuing anything against me. In fact," I paused, letting my eyes lock on Karen. "They've documented her actions as potential harassment." The room was dead silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Karen's face had gone tight, her eyes darting between the documents like maybe, just maybe, she was starting to realize she'd walked into a fight she couldn't win. Bill cleared his throat. "We weren't aware of these details." "Oh, there's more," I said, my tone still calm but with an edge now. I pulled out the HOA violation notice, her so-called official complaint, and laid it flat for all to see. Attached was my notarized statement outlining the timeline of her actions, complete with supporting evidence. That's when the murmurs started. A couple of neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of the board members leaned back, arms crossed, watching Karen instead of me now. Bill let out a slow breath. "We'll need time to review all this, but based on what we're seeing tonight, it appears this may have been an abuse of the HOA complaint process." Karen opened her mouth to speak, but Bill's hand came up sharply. "Enough! You've had your say. Now it's our turn." For a moment, she just sat there, silent, seething. I could see her jaw working like she was chewing on her next move. If it had ended there, I might have gone home satisfied. But Karen? She wasn't built to take a loss quietly. 3 days later, I found out just how far she was willing to go. It came in the mail, thick envelope, legal letterhead. Inside was a cease and desist order from a law firm. The language was all sharp, edges and empty threats. I had emotionally misled a minor, caused emotional distress to both Karen and her son, and was to either surrender the motorcycle as restitution or face civil action. It was ridiculous, blatantly false. But when I saw the attorney's signature at the bottom, I knew she wasn't bluffing this time. This wasn't about the Harley anymore. This was about her ego. She needed this win, needed to prove she could push anyone around, even someone who wouldn't bow to her so-called authority, and in that moment, I made a decision. If she wanted to turn this into a war, then I was going to make sure it was one she'd regret for the rest of her life. I didn't waste time stewing over that cease and desist letter. The second I read it, I knew exactly who to call. Mark picked up on the second ring. She finally lawyered up, he asked, voice calm but carrying a hint of disbelief. Oh, she did more than that, I said. She's claiming I emotionally misled her son and caused them mental distress. Wants the bike as restitution. There was a pause, then a short, sharp laugh. She's bluffing, but if she's trying to initiate civil action based on something the HOA already reviewed and dismissed, she's walking into dangerous territory, especially with the paper trail you've got. We didn't waste time. That same day, I drove down to his office. He slid the letter across his desk like it was nothing more than a parking ticket. Here's what we'll do, Mark said, leaning forward. We draft a formal rebuttal. Not just a "you're wrong" note, something backed by every shred of evidence you've got. We'll attach your proof of ownership, the police report, the video transcripts, and the state attorney's letter. I grinned. And we don't stop there, do we? His answering smile was slow and knowing. No. We also include a counter notice, warning her that continued harassment could lead to you filing your own civil claim. That'll put the pressure back where it belongs. By the end of the day, we had it ready. It wasn't just a letter, it was a dossier. A neatly organized wall of evidence, every page a reminder that she'd picked a fight she couldn't win. I sent it through a lawyer I knew from my veterans group. When Karen received it, I imagined her ripping open that envelope expecting to see me backpedaling. Instead, she got a front row seat to her own undoing. And just like that, silence. No knocks on my door. No smug little waves when I pulled into the driveway. No sudden police visits. But the silence didn't mean nothing was happening. The neighborhood had noticed. People talk, especially in a community like ours. It started with a few casual conversations at mailboxes and driveways, hushed words between neighbors who'd had their own run-ins with Karen over the years. She'd hassled people over paint shades, lawn length, even a neighbor's service, dog. But nobody had ever stood up to her. Not until now. One evening, a guy from 3 houses down stopped me as I was locking up my garage. Heard you gave Karen a taste of her own medicine, he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. About time someone did, I shrugged, just defending what's mine. He smiled. Yeah, well, word is, you might have started something. Turns out, I had. By the next HOA meeting, it wasn't just me walking in with a folder. A petition was circulating, one calling for Karen's removal from the board entirely. The signatures were piling up fast. She wasn't there to see it. Whether she'd caught wind of what was coming or just didn't have the stomach for the confrontation, her seat sat empty. Bill, the HOA president, cleared his throat and read the petition aloud. This is a request to remove board member Karen Whitman for repeated misuse of authority, harassment of residents, and filing of false complaints. The room buzzed with quiet energy. Names on the petition included people I'd never spoken to before. People she'd alienated over the years who were finally finding their voice. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. Karen was out. I wish. I could say she walked over afterward, admitted defeat, maybe even apologized. But that's not how people like her operate. She didn't show her face, didn't speak to anyone, and while her absence was its own kind of victory, I knew this war hadn't just been about a motorcycle. It had been about drawing a line, about refusing to let someone with a title, HOA board member, attorney's client, self-proclaimed queen of the cul-de-sac, use that title as a weapon. And standing there in that meeting room, watching the board vote her out, I realized something. You don't have to fight every battle, but when you do, you'd better make sure it's one they'll remember. The morning after the vote, the cul-de-sac felt different. It wasn't just the absence of Karen's presence, the way she used to stand at the corner like a self-appointed sentry, scanning every yard for something to complain about. It was the air itself, lighter, looser. People lingered longer at their mailboxes, waved more readily from their driveways. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like my home was mine again. I rolled the Harley out from under the oak tree that Saturday. The chrome caught the morning sun, throwing back that same gleam I'd fallen in love with years ago when I'd first put it together. Every custom part had a memory. Late nights in the garage, the smell of oil and metal, the satisfaction of tightening that last bolt and knowing it was perfect. For me, the bike had never been just about riding. It was freedom on two wheels, a reminder of the times I'd pushed through storms, both on the road and in life, and come out the other side. When Karen had tried to take it, it hadn't been about noise complaints or community harmony. It had been an attack on something personal, something that carried my history. And I'd be lying if I said the fight hadn't worn me down. That afternoon, as I sat on the porch with a cold drink, a neighbor from across the street wandered over. An older guy named Howard. We'd exchanged polite nods before, but never more than that. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. I gestured to the empty chair. He settled in and took a long breath, like he'd been holding something in for a while. "You know, you did the whole street a favor." I raised an eyebrow. "How's that?" "She's been running this neighborhood like a kingdom for years," he said. "Made my wife cry once, over the color of our shutters. We didn't fight her. Figured it wasn't worth the trouble. But you? You stood your ground. You showed everyone she could be beaten." I didn't know what to say to that. I wasn't looking to be anyone's example. I just wanted to keep what was mine. But hearing it put that way, it made me realize the fight had been bigger than I'd thought. Over the next week, more people started talking. A couple with a service dog told me Karen had tried to force them to build a 6-foot privacy fence because she didn't want to see the animal in her view. Another neighbor said she'd filed noise complaints against their teenage son for playing guitar in his own bedroom at 3 p.m. on a Saturday. Everyone had a story. Everyone had been too tired, too afraid, or too alone to push back. And maybe that's why the petition had come together so fast. Because once they saw someone take the first swing, they remembered they could too. One evening, I wheeled the Harley down the driveway and fired it up. The engine's growl filled the street, but this time there were no curtains twitching, no scowls from across the way. Just a few nods from neighbors and even a thumbs up from a guy walking his dog. I took the long way out of the neighborhood, letting the road and the wind clear the last of the tension from my shoulders. Somewhere along the highway, I caught myself thinking about the strange way fights like this change you. You go in thinking it's about one thing, about defending your property, your rights, and you come out realizing it's about dignity, about not letting someone strip you of it because they think their title makes them untouchable. That's the thing about dignity. It's not loud, not flashy. Most days, it just looks like holding your ground and refusing to hand over the keys, literally or otherwise, to someone who hasn't earned them. When I pulled back into the driveway, the Harley's engine ticking as it cooled, I glanced at the oak tree and thought about how close I'd come to losing this spot. I wasn't naive enough to think the neighborhood would stay perfect forever. There's always someone ready to take Karen's place, someone who thinks power is a tool for control instead of stewardship. But now, I knew one thing for certain. If they came knocking for me again, I'd be ready. And this time, I wouldn't be fighting alone. I should have known she wouldn't just vanish. For a while, the silence after Karen's removal felt real, peaceful. Like the storm had passed and all that was left was the hum of my Harley on a Saturday morning. But people like her don't disappear. They regroup. It started with little things. A neighbor mentioning they'd heard a rumor about me intimidating folks on the street. A flyer tucked into my mailbox advertising a community safety meeting at someone's house 2 streets over, hosted by none other than Karen Whitman. She couldn't boss people around through the HOA anymore, so she was trying a different tactic: poison the well. One Thursday evening, Howard knocked on my door. His face said it all, tight jaw, uneasy eyes. "She's at it again," he said. He handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a printout from some private Facebook group she'd started. The title read, "Protecting Our Neighborhood from Hostility." And, right there in the middle of the post, without using my name, she described a certain resident who threatened a minor, broke a promise, and uses intimidation to silence neighbors. She called it the motorcycle incident, like it was some unsolved crime. I could feel the old frustration rising in my chest, but this time I didn't let it boil over. Instead, I took a slow breath and nodded. "All right, let's handle it." Mark's phone rang not 10 minutes later. "I figured she'd try something," he said. "Here's the difference now. You've got her history documented. Every complaint, every false claim, every stunt she's pulled. This isn't just a nuisance anymore. It's targeted harassment, and that has teeth in court." By the next afternoon, we had a cease and desist of our own drawn up, formal, clean, and signed by my attorney. It spelled out in plain language that any further defamation, intimidation, or interference in my life would result in legal action. And unlike her scattershot threats, ours came with a stack of documented evidence ready for a judge. I had it hand-delivered. I don't know what she expected to find when she opened that envelope. Maybe a shaky apology, maybe nothing at all. But the look on her face when the courier walked up to her porch, that alone almost made the entire ordeal worth it. The fallout was quick. The Facebook group disappeared overnight. The whispers stopped. And for the first time, it felt like she'd finally run out of ammo. But even then, there was this strange emptiness in the neighborhood. Without her stirring the pot, it was almost too quiet. People were friendly, sure, but there was a wariness, like we were all waiting to see who would try to fill the vacuum she'd left behind. One Saturday, as I rolled the Harley out under the oak tree, a couple walking their dog stopped in front of my driveway. "You know," the woman said with a smile. "That thing used to drive Karen crazy." I grinned. "That's the idea," the man chuckled. "Well, now it's kind of a symbol. Every time we hear it start up, we know the street's still ours." It struck me then how much this fight had shifted things. Not just for me, but for everyone here. It wasn't just about a motorcycle anymore. It was about ownership, about belonging, about not letting one person dictate how we live. Later that night, as the sun went down and the street settled into its usual stillness, I found myself thinking about how close this had come to going differently. If I'd ignored that first knock, if I'd given in to the police visit, if I'd decided the HOA fight wasn't worth the trouble, the Harley would be gone. My dignity would have taken a hit I might not have gotten back, and Karen would still be sitting at the top of the HOA, smiling like she owned the place. Instead, she was out. The street was quiet. And my bike? Still mine. Always mine. But I also knew people like her never stop entirely. They just wait. And if she, or anyone like her, ever decided to test me again, they'd find I hadn't forgotten a thing. I thought we'd reached the end of it. Weeks had passed without so much as a sideways glance from Karen. The air was cooler now, autumn creeping in, and the sound of leaves crunching underfoot had replaced the constant hum of neighborhood tension. But peace, I've learned, is fragile, and one unexpected phone call can shatter it in seconds. It was early on a Tuesday morning when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me swipe. "Mr. Owens?" The voice was clipped, formal. "This is Officer Daniels with County Code Enforcement. We received a complaint regarding an unregistered, non-operational vehicle on your property." I froze. "You talking about the Harley?" "Yes, sir. According to the complaint, the motorcycle hasn't been operational for several months and constitutes a code violation." My jaw clenched. "It's operational. I ride it every weekend." There was a pause, then, "Mind if I swing by and verify?" I knew exactly what this was. This wasn't random. This had Karen's fingerprints all over it. "Come on over," I said, already heading for the garage. 20 minutes later, a county truck pulled up. Officer Daniels stepped out, clipboard in hand, the kind of professional politeness that says they've seen every kind of nonsense complaint there is. I rolled the Harley out under the oak tree. "Go ahead," I told him. The engine roared too, life on the first turn of the key. Daniels raised his brows and made a quick note. "That'll do it," he said with a faint smile. "Sorry to bother you. Some people have too much time on their hands." I didn't have to ask who he meant when. He drove off. I stood there for a long minute, the engine's rumble fading into the cool morning air. She was testing the waters, seeing if she could still get to me without showing her face. That night, Howard stopped by again. "Heard about the code enforcement visit," he said. "Word travels fast," I replied. He gave a short laugh. "In this neighborhood? Always. And you should know you're not the only one she's been sniffing around. She's been dropping little warnings to people, talking about how you're volatile, how she's worried for her safety." I leaned back against the porch rail. "Trying to turn the tide again." Howard's eyes narrowed. "Yeah, but this time, people aren't buying it. Too many folks saw what really happened. Still, I knew I couldn't just let it go. If she thought she could keep jabbing from the sidelines, sooner or later she'd find a way to land a blow. So I called Mark again. "She's using third parties now," I told him. "Code enforcement rumors. She's trying to provoke me into making a mistake." "Then don't give her one," he said. "But document everything. Every visit, every whisper you hear about. And if she crosses the line again, we'll shut it down hard." I followed his advice to the letter. 2 days later, I got an anonymous note in my mailbox. No envelope, just a folded sheet of paper. T. Read, "She's planning something big for the next HOA open meeting. Even though she's not on the board anymore, she's rallying people to finally deal with you. Watch yourself." The handwriting was messy, rushed. No signature. I sat at the kitchen table with that note under my hand, the sound of the fridge humming in the background. Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part of me knew this was the moment everything had been building toward. If she wanted a public showdown, I'd give her one. But it wouldn't be like last time. No slow build-up, no drawn-out back and forth. This time, I'd end it. I started pulling the folder back out, the one with every scrap of evidence, every letter, every photo. But I also added something new, a short, simple statement I planned to read if she tried anything, not defensive. Not angry. Just the truth. Laid out so plainly that anyone with ears would see through her for good. As I slid it into place, I caught myself smiling. If Karen thought she could walk into that meeting and turn the neighborhood against me, she was about to learn what it felt like to burn every last bridge she had left. The night of the meeting, the air felt charged. Not loud, not chaotic, just heavy, like everyone knew something was about to happen. I arrived early, just like before, and took a seat near the front. My folder sat on the table in front of me, neat, ready, unshakable. 5 minutes later, the doors swung open and Karen walked in. She wasn't trying to blend in. She was dressed like she was about to give a victory speech, a bright red blazer and those ever-present sunglasses perched on her head. She smiled at a few people, but the smiles she got back were tight, polite. I noticed she scanned the room quickly, eyes landing on me for just a second before she found a seat in the second row. Bill, the HOA president, called the meeting to order. It was supposed to be a normal session. Budget updates, landscaping proposals, the usual. But about 20 minutes in, Karen raised her hand. "I have a matter of community concern," she said loudly, so there was no mistaking her voice. Bill hesitated. "You're not on the board anymore, Karen. You can speak during open forum at the end." She didn't wait. "This is about safety," she said, turning in her seat so she could address the whole room. "Some of you know there's been tension with a certain resident. I've tried to resolve it privately, but I'm concerned for my safety and the safety of this neighborhood." The murmur started instantly, like a wave rolling across the room. I let her talk. She brought up the same tired story, how I'd promised her son the motorcycle, how I'd become aggressive when she'd tried to mediate, how she'd been forced to involve the police. Only now she'd added a fresh layer, that she'd received disturbing communications from me and that I'd been seen watching her house at night. That last part actually drew a couple of gasps. She paused, like she was letting it sink in. Then I stood up. My voice was calm, almost casual. "May I respond?" Bill nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. I picked up my folder and stepped to the front of the room, turning so I faced the audience, not just the board. "I've listened to this same story in different versions for weeks," I began, "and every time the details get more colorful. But here's what doesn't change: the truth." I opened the folder and began laying documents on the table one by one. "This is my title and registration for the Harley. 12 years of ownership. Clean. This is the police report from the day she called them. No wrongdoing, case closed. This is a notarized statement of every interaction we've had, complete with timestamps and supporting evidence." I held up the stills from the doorbell footage, the ones of her son pointing at my bike and saying, "Mom said you'd give it to me." This isn't rumor. This isn't opinion. This is reality. The murmurs were different now, quieter, heavier. And as for these disturbing communications, I continued, not a single message from me exists, not one, because they never happened. I let that hang there for a beat, scanning the room. Here's the thing about living in a neighborhood like this. We all want it to be safe. We all want to trust each other. But safety doesn't come from silence. It doesn't come from letting someone use fear and authority to push people around. It comes from standing up when something's wrong, even if it's uncomfortable. I closed the folder slowly. I've stood my ground not because I like fighting with my neighbors, but because I believe in protecting what's mine, and in making sure nobody here has to go through what I've gone through. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, from the back of the room, someone started clapping. Another joined in, and then the sound rolled forward until it filled the space. Karen sat frozen, her lips pressed into a thin line. Bill cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mr. Owens. I think we've heard enough." The rest of the meeting moved on without her saying another word. She left before it ended, her steps quick, head down. By the time I got home that night, the neighborhood felt lighter again. Not the tentative relief from before, but solid, certain. The next weekend, I parked the Harley under the oak tree, the chrome catching the sunlight just right. When I fired it up, I noticed something I hadn't before. Neighbors smiling, waving, as the engine growled. Not one complaint, not one sideways glance. Karen had wanted to take my bike. Instead, she'd given me something else entirely, my peace, my dignity, and a street that finally felt like home. And when I rode out that morning, I took the long way. Because sometimes the best way to celebrate keeping what's yours is to let the whole world hear it roar.